Hey folks, welcome. In this section of the course, we're going to talk about some deployment concepts with S3. Now, S3 is kind of a complementary resource when doing DevOps in AWS. It's kind of like that supporting actor that gets a lot of scenes in the movie. Now, with S3, related to the DevOps Pro Certification exam, some of your key words are durable storage, cheap, secure. So anytime you run into a scenario question that's talking about storage and those types of keywords, you probably want to start thinking about S3. It's used extensively in DevOps operations. It's low cost and highly durable, and this dictates that it should always be considered as a storage option. It also provides comprehensive security and compliance capability that meet even the most stringent regulatory requirements. Specific uses for S3 include log data storage, and we'll have a lesson on exporting, load balancing log data to S3. Secure storage should only be accessed via IAM roles, and really anything you want to store in S3 securely, you can access from an EC2 instance with an IAM role, and I'll show a little bit of that here shortly. But you could store anything in the S3 bucket. You could store database credentials. You could store config files for bootstrapping. And with an IAM role attached to an EC2 instance, you can retrieve that data programmatically. In an upcoming lesson, we'll talk about cross-account access, accessing an S3 bucket from a different account. Maybe you have an AWS account for development and a production account. So we'll look at that as well. And in the next lesson, we will look at lifecycle policies. So we have our S3 bucket. We have data in the S3 bucket. We want to use S3 policies to save some money. As you move your data to some of the other storage options, you can save money. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the trade-offs between S3 and Glacier. And those types of things can come up on the exam a good bit. Scenarios such as you need to store your data securely. And a lot of the clues and keywords for Glacier are such words as long-term storage or something to the effect of the data does not need to be immediately accessible. So if your scenario says something to that effect, long-term storage doesn't need to be immediately accessible, that is screaming for Glacier as part of your answer. So those are some of the uses for S3 in DevOps scenarios. And before we talk about lifecycle management, cross-account access, exporting load balancer log data, let's take a quick look at configuring an EC2 instance with an IAM role. And once your EC2 instance has this IAM role to access S3, I won't show the code, but it's a handful of code to then access data in your S3 bucket programmatically. So let's conclude this lesson by going over to IAM. And let's go to roles. Now I have a role set up, S3 access for EC2. Let's go into that role. Now note our policy is a AWS managed policy, Amazon S3 full access. Let's just take a look. And it's pretty straightforward. So with this policy attached to our role, we have full access to S3. And let's take a look at trust relationships. Note, EC2 is being trusted, as well as the ARN for this role. The next step would be, let's go to EC2 and launch an instance. And we'll just go Linux AMI, T2 micro, configure instance details. Here's the key. IAM role. We're going to attach our S3 access for EC2. From there, we can launch the instance with this role. And as we saw, it's going to have full access to our S3 bucket. So once the instance is launched, it's a matter of having an application, let's say Python, for instance, and literally it's like 5 lines of code to retrieve data in the S3 bucket. But this is how it would be configured. This is a good option anytime you want to retrieve any kind of credentials from S3, database connection information, or even config files for bootstrapping. But I could go on and on. There are any number of things you could store securely and durably in S3 and access using an IAM role. So with that, let's conclude this lesson and move on to lifecycle management.